Pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our vision statement that I always read out is connecting, engaging, growing. The next item is consideration of agenda amendments or deletions.
We do not have any for this evening.
Okay. And that moves us right into why we're here, the presentation.
Yeah, so I have about, it's approximately 20 slide presentation. Takes me approximately 20 minutes to get through it. And if anyone has questions for clarification as I'm going through it, you're more than welcome to ask those. If you have specific, more detailed questions, I would ask that you hold those till after the presentation. And then after the presentation is done, the board and myself will take questions and comments from the audience, as well as entertain questions amongst each other and any other discussion points. So we've put together a presentation just to kind of give an overview, a real high-level overview to explain school finance and how that works, and just how some of the recent changes in legislation are impacting schools and presenting challenges for schools from a financial standpoint. And so this presentation is kind of an overview of several presentations that we've listened to over the last year. And some of those presentations have been like 100+ slide presentations. So this has been condensed into 20-some slides. So it's just, again, it's a real kind of general overview. And I want to start off with just reminding, just kind of a reminder of our priorities as a school board and as a school corporation and a community. When you look at our vision statement, our mission statement, our belief statements, and then our priority areas of focus, those are important to keep in mind as we talk about school finance. We look at our priority areas of focus: provide a safe learning environment, provide enjoyable learning opportunities within and beyond the classroom, provide opportunities to master relevant content, knowledge, and skill development, provide responsible fiscal management. And so those are our priority areas of focus. And again, I just wanted to emphasize those as we go and we start talking about the school finance and the challenges. In 2019, legislation changed how schools were funded. Mrs. Anderson suggested I use visual aids to kind of jazz things up a bit. And so got some buckets here representing the different funds. When the state went to the funding system that we have, it's kind of easiest to think about it in as far as buckets. And so you look at our education fund, our operation fund, and our debt service fund. The education fund comes from state funding. Operations and debt service are generated from property taxes. The key thing to keep in mind is that the money just can't move freely between these buckets. It can't move freely between these different funding streams. Another thing to keep in mind is that schools get audited every 2 years by the State Board of Accounts. So, we're held accountable for these funds we receive and making sure that we're spending them properly and according to legislation. So it's not just, hey, we get this money and we can move it around the different funds and we can spend it however we want. We have guidelines and laws that we have to follow, and we're audited every 2 years to make sure that we're staying in compliance. On those handouts that you received, there's information on one side. On the other side is this graphic, which I'm very proud of. I spent probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 minutes with ChatGPT designing this graphic, so I'm really proud of it. So that's on this page. You can look at this and kind of use it, as well as the buckets up here as we go through this to kind of help as a reference point. So the first bucket we're going to talk about is the debt service fund. And this one is, it's unique and it has some really unique characteristics, and it gets confusing, and it also kind of at times gets schools kind of a bad rap when they do building renovations or additions and things like that, because it's misleading to the public of where this money's coming from and how it's being spent. And I believe the best way to explain it is that it functions like a loan. And schools can use this, but it's restricted to certain things. We can't use any money from debt service for pay raises, for salaries. We can only use it for capital projects, building renovations, and improvements. And the amount of money we have available to borrow is a formula based on our assessed property value and our tax rate, and then our amount of debt that we already have. So we have an amount of debt that we can borrow based on our tax rate and based on our property value. And so these last 4 years, we've done some building renovations. We put new roofs, we put new HVAC systems, and so we've done a lot of improvements to our infrastructure, and that came from this bucket here. And then what happens is on the property taxes, that money comes straight out of the property taxes, and we pay that debt back. We pay those bonds back out of this fund. That is basically, our main way that we can generate and do these building projects and these building renovations. Here's the catch. If we don't use this fund, we don't get this money. We can't put it in any, so we don't borrow money to do these building improvements. That doesn't put more money in these buckets. That money's just lost to the school. And so that is key in understanding, how can the school afford to put a new roofs on? How can they afford to do the HVAC? And why aren't they putting that money into teacher raises or doing other things with that money? It's because it's in this bucket and it can only be used that way for those specific things. And so for the rest of this presentation, we're just going to forget about this bucket, okay? Because it doesn't really help us when we start talking about some of the operation costs and salary challenges. But we'll set it over here. But for all practical purposes, this bucket doesn't help us for the other things that we're going to talk about now. So that's the debt service bucket. Then we have the education fund, and this bucket, this is what pays for everything educational. All of our teachers' salaries and benefits, they come out of this. Teacher salary benefits, administrator salary and benefits, instructional aides, academic support staff, all of our curriculum. When Indiana went to no textbook fees for parents 2 or 3 years ago, that was a great thing. And then the state said, we'll fund that for you. You'll get a textbook fund. So we did that first year. Then the next year they said, well, we're going to tweak that a little bit. And now this year they just said, well, you're just going to absorb it in your education fund. And so we don't get any separate money now for curriculum textbooks. We have to pay for it out of this bucket. All of our classroom materials, extracurricular coaching, all of those things, anything student related to education comes out of this bucket. And one thing that, you look at teacher salary and you say, well, teachers are making this much money. And so, you have this many staff, they're making this much money. And you think you have an idea of what that takes out of this bucket. But what a lot of people don't understand is that salary, you have to pay payroll taxes. We have benefits. We have matching. We are required by state to pay into retirement funds. And so all of that is on top of that salary. That all comes out of this bucket. So that's our education fund bucket. And then the restrictions that the state puts on this bucket, they tell us that you have this money that comes into this bucket, and this is generated from ADM. I don't think I mentioned that. This gets funded by our student count. So we have 2 ADM count days. We have one in October. We have one in February that we just had yesterday. And so when you talk about planning and budgeting for a school year, we have no idea how much money we're gonna get in this bucket until this next week, because we get approximately $8,000 per student to go into this bucket. We get half of that based on how many kids are enrolled in October, on the October count day. We get the other half in February on however many kids are enrolled. So if we lose 10 kids between October and February, that's 4 times, what did I say, 10 kids, that's a $40,000 hit to this bucket. And we have to plan staffing and we have to plan all of these things, but this money we don't know until we get to the count days. So this funding is generated from our count day. The state says that 65% of this money has got to go towards teacher salary and benefits. So the money we bring into this bucket, 65% has to go to teacher salary and benefits. The state then comes along and says, you also have to pay teachers a minimum of $45,000. And that continues to be increased over the last 3 or 4 years, and they're talking about increasing it more. And so when they increase the teacher salary, then they put more money in this bucket for us, right? No. So they tell us that 65% has to go towards salary and benefits, $45,000 minimum teacher salary, and then they tell us, well, you can use a little bit of this money that you have left over to put in this bucket, but only 15%. So you can only transfer 15% into this bucket, and you can't use any of this money for your operating costs. You can't pay for transportation, you can't pay for utilities, you can't pay for any facility maintenance out of this bucket. But you can move 15% over there if you need to. So all of these mandates they put on this bucket, they don't help increase this fund. There's mandates that end up causing us to spend more money out of this bucket, but no increased money to help with this bucket. So that's our education fund bucket. Now we get to the operations fund. This bucket, this one comes from the state funding based on our student enrollment. This one comes from local property tax. And this is the bucket we have to pay for all of our busing, all of our transportation costs, building maintenance, cleaning repairs, maintenance staff, all of our custodial staff, all of our cleaning supplies, our gas bill, electric bill, all of those things, our technology infrastructure, safety and security, that all comes out of the operation fund bucket. When we get hit with inflation, when gas prices go up, when electric prices go up, that affects this bucket. We don't get extra money put in this bucket when costs go up. And so that's the operation fund. Now here's the things that end up making this bucket really challenging for us. In this area, we get hit really hard with the circuit breaker. Circuit breaker is great for property owners in that they get a tax cap break. But this operation fund, we have a tax rate that we need X number of dollars to go into this bucket to pay all of our expenses. And what happens with the circuit breaker, we have a need here, but the circuit breaker comes in and caps the taxes here. So all of this money above this, the school doesn't get a claim, we just do without. And so currently, the circuit breaker, the school loses about $1.4 million out of this bucket. Then we have the TIF district, where this is kind of like a tax break for businesses. And so because of that TIF, in our TIF district, the school loses another $1 million out of this bucket. So between circuit breaker and TIF, we are short $2.4 million of what we need in this bucket for our operating costs. And there's no way for us to recover that money. When that tax cap, it's just gone and lost to the school. And now we have Senate Enrolled Act 1 that has come in. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. That increases that loss that we get through circuit breaker and TIF. Senate Enrolled Act 1 is going to increase that loss. And so then we also, this bucket, as I mentioned earlier, gets hit with inflation. We have limited options as a school to generate more revenue. So we can't generate more revenue to put into this bucket. And then another thing that we really don't think a lot about in this area is that vouchers to private schools affect us. And how it affects us, we don't have private schools in Elwood where voucher money is going towards, but what happens is millions of dollars that the state would normally put into the education fund is now going to vouchers. And a lot in Marion County, Indianapolis schools, millions of dollars are going to vouchers for private schools. Well, that takes away money that would go in our bucket. And if the education fund was higher, then there would be a larger 15% to transfer over into operations. So we get indirectly hit with vouchers as well, because it lessens our 15% that we could transfer to operations. So those are all the things that are impacting the operation fund. The circuit breaker, this is just a little bit more detailed explanation. It limits how much property tax revenue the school can collect. When tax caps are exceeded, the revenue in the operation fund is reduced by the amount that exceeds the cap. So anything over the cap, which is at 1.4, the school loses out on. And these losses are permanent and must be absorbed by the school corporation. And then the TIF district, in essence, when property tax value for redevelopment projects, when the assessed value grows, the school can't capture any of that for as long as the TIF is in place. And so when the tax base grows, that assessed value is unavailable for the operations fund, and this creates long-term pressure on the operation fund. And then Senate Enrolled Act, just as a very, very, very general overview of this, is that basically it's creating a new 2% tax cap deduction. So it's adding another 2% loss to the circuit breaker, and then it's slowing down the net assessed value growth over the next 5 years. And I'm going to show you a graph here shortly of what that's going to do to the school's funds as this kicks in and impacts the circuit breaker even more. This is a fine print. This is more detail as far as the Senate Enrolled Act, and this information will be available on our website, but this gives you a little bit more detail into exactly how Senate Enrolled Act 1 works. Statewide impact. Policy Analytics is a financial consulting firm that we're working with, and they're working with a number of school districts across the state. And what they have validated that the circuit breaker is going to continue to increase, that the net assessed value will see minimal growth, and then our operations fund revenue will steadily decrease. So I mean, they're calculating all of this across the state. This is what school districts are facing. When looking at other school districts across the state since 2018, there has been 70 successful operating referendums run across the state of Indiana for school districts to help with the loss that they're experiencing in the operation fund just from circuit breaker and TIF. And now, and basically over election periods, which it used to be you could do it in May and November, that's when those 70 operating referendums have been run over the last, since 2018. An average of approximately 5 to 10 school districts usually run a referendum a year. Because of the changes of SEA 1 now, it's being projected that over 100 school districts are looking to run an operating referendum this next fall. So you go from 5 to 10 a year to over 100 are planning to run a referendum in November. And that just, I share that just to emphasize the impact that these changes are having on schools and that what schools are needing to do to try to survive to be able to pay their bills. And then what does that look like more specific for us locally? The annual projected loss is projected to grow to over $3 million a year, and then it just continues to compound. So you take that circuit breaker loss, you take that TIF loss, and you look at a healthy school balance. We should have about 2 to 3 months of payroll set aside, and you can see where our balance was staying pretty healthy. And at 2025, we were down to 3.6 million cash balance. which was kind of the low end of where we needed it to be, and you look at when SEA 1 now is kicking in, and you look at the end of 2027, next calendar year, if we continue with our current spending, with the extra losses that are going to happen now with Senate Enrolled 1, our projected loss right now is that we'll be $200,000 in the hole by the end of 2027. And if you go all the way out to 2033, with our current spending and the current losses that we're facing, we would be at a negative $17.6 million deficit by 2033. Obviously, that's not sustainable, and we cannot do that. And so some things to keep in mind is that our expenditures are outpacing our revenue due to the property tax loss, due to the rising operational costs, and due to the revenue growth being structurally limited. And so this gap here is not because Elwood Community Schools is being wasteful in their spending. We are managing our money very cost effectively. We are not overstaffed. We are not spending money on frivolous things. We are doing the best we can with the resources we have to provide safe and quality educational environments for our kids. And so this gap is not caused by us being wasteful. It's being driven by the funding system right now. And that the funding system and Senate Enrolled Act 1 is making that gap grow. And so as a community, if you're sitting down at home, right, and you're doing your budget, you look at your income, you look at your expenses, and you try to figure it out. And so that's what we have to do as a school system and as a community. And you look at our choices. Our choices are either to cut costs or increase revenue. And we can reduce operating expenses, or we can look at running an operating referendum to generate more revenue. And the circles are intertwined, overlapping on purpose, because what we really need to do is a combination of both, right? And so if we decide to run our operating referendum, we're still going to need to cut some costs, because realistically, we wouldn't go to the community and expect to make up all of that lost revenue that we have in circuit breaker. But what is going on right now is not sustainable. And so how could an operating referendum help? Well, it provides local control to stabilize funding. The choice comes back to the community on how much are we going to invest in the school. And it helps offset the circuit breaker loss, addresses the rising operational costs. It protects our essential services. It avoids cuts to programs and positions that provide safe and supportive learning environments. If we didn't run a referendum, then revenue loss is going to continue to grow each year. Cash balance declines and quickly becomes negative, as we saw as early as the end of 2027. Deferred maintenance and increased long-term costs. We just kind of came through a period of what the corporation would look like when you don't have the money to take care of your buildings. When I came here 6 years ago, when it would rain, we had trash cans sitting all around the second floor of the high school catching the rainwater. We had classrooms that were either too cold or too hot. So over the last 4 years, we've been able to put new roofs on the building. We've been able to put new HVAC systems because of leveraging this money. But now we're going to be in a position where we're not going to be able to maintain these. And if we're not able to maintain them, then another 5 or 10 years, we're going to be back in that same boat where we have broken down buildings and not great conditions conducive for good learning environments. Programs and service reductions become unavoidable. We have to start prioritizing and looking at, okay, what programs are we going to keep? What programs are we going to eliminate? And if we can't be competitive with local school districts, we're going to lose outstanding teachers and staff to other districts. And these challenges will just compound over time. What it means specifically for our students and staff, without referendum to provide stable operation funding, then safe and reliable transportation services become strained, building conditions deteriorate, safety and security investments are limited, technology infrastructure deteriorates. An operating referendum could protect safe and supportive learning environments for our students and staff. This is just kind of a recap on the funds, on our challenges, and what an operating referendum will do. And then lastly, the question before us isn't whether Elwood Community Schools matter. We all know it matters. You folks wouldn't be here tonight. You folks wouldn't be watching at home if you didn't think that Elwood Community Schools matter. And so it's not a question of whether it matters, it's how we as a community choose to sustain what we value. And right now, my opinion, and I think it is pretty widespreadly shared amongst the majority of our staff, our students, and our parents, is that overall we're doing pretty well at Elwood Community Schools, and we're continuing to get better. And so do we want to continue on that path? And if we do, how much are we willing to invest and pour into the education of our students? And that is the conclusion of my spine-tingling PowerPoint presentation. So I will pause for a moment. Does the board have any comments or questions before we open it up to the public?
Well, I'd just like to say that, we've been suffering from the property tax system for several years with the circuit breaker. We're one of the schools with the highest percentage loss in the state, which means we've been watching our money carefully for several years. Now we're getting hit with more.
Any other comments or questions or? Any comments or questions from the audience?
I'll ask. When textbook funding went away, pretty much, was anything given back for all the Chromebooks that we paid for over?
No.
We don't tend to get anything back. There's a lot of unfunded mandates that the legislature has been imposing on us over the past few years.
This slideshow will be available on our website. This recording of this meeting will be available on our website. You are welcome to, I'm not ending this meeting, I'm just letting you know as you're giving you some time to think, I will be available to answer questions. If you think of any after tonight, if you're listening at home and have questions, you're welcome to email me, call me. You can talk to the board members as well. So we're available to answer questions. We don't have answers. We're just letting you know, wanted you to understand how the funding system works and wanted you to have an understanding of the challenges that we're facing as we look the next couple months and work with our financial advisors, work internally with our administrative leadership team, working with our teachers, our staff to come up with ideas and make decisions on, okay, what do we need to do to correct this and put ourselves in a position where we're not going to go into a deficit in the next year and a half.
How does the referendum work? How do you put it in place?
So
You said about this fall, 100 school corporations in Indiana are going to have a referendum in place. How does that work?
So the first thing the first step is having conversations and seeing if it's feasible, seeing how much we would need to generate, And so that's what we're doing right now. Having conversations. If the board were to decide to run an operating referendum, because it lies in the board's hands to pass a resolution. They would need to pass a resolution that we are going to run an operating referendum. And timing wise, we would need to decide that between now and May would be the optimal timing. And so between now and May, we need to decide, okay, are we going to run an operating referendum? And if so, what is the ask going to be? What would we ask to increase the rate to capture some of that circuit breaker loss that's going to help us financially to be able to continue to provide the services that we are doing right now? So we need to establish a minimum rate of what that would take. And then we need to say, okay, is that a realistic ask of the community? And if it's not, then we need to adjust it. And we need to find out what is a realistic ask of the community. And by May, that number would need to be determined by May, and that would be part of the resolution. And so when the board passes a resolution, and they would set the rate at that time, and then they would notify the proper officials, and then that officially becomes part of the ballot in November. And then the community would have between the resolution being passed and the election in November, the community would have time to learn more about it to be able to make an informed decision in November to vote.
One thing I was just thinking about, to kind of put this in perspective a little bit, is that, Dr. Troy said that we got about 100 schools expected to have a referendum this year. But there's already 83 that have referendums. So what that means is that over 60% of the schools in Indiana think they have to have a referendum. So it's not an Elwood situation, it's widespread throughout the state. And the schools are just reacting to the situation that they've been put into.
There are other local communities surrounding us that are doing referendums also. There are other ones that are also looking at other ways to cut. There's some local ones that are looking to cut transportation completely out of the school system. That way, the parents would have to take the kids to school. There's no buses. They're finding ways to cut. We're just trying to find ways to maintain and continue to keep getting better and better as we go through, whether, that is a referendum or, like Dr. Troy said, a combination of both, but to still continue where we're going and the projection of how the community's gotten better and better over the years with the school, to continue to keep building on it so that we don't see it going back, as Dr. Troy said, with the school deteriorating and getting worse and doing stuff, because there's nothing worse than freezing in the classroom or walking by and getting rained on or things like that. Or if we get rid of transportation, and I'm not saying we are by any means at all, so I want to say that to you, but there are school systems that are. So now kids have to walk, or a parent has to try to figure out how they're going to get that taken care of. So just trying to do what we can here to best support this community, because, and I'm sure just like everybody in this room, we care about the community, we care about the school. Everyone on this board cares about this community and school, or we wouldn't be on here. So we're just trying to find the best answer we can to help everybody continue to grow and get better.
And whatever happens, we're gonna need your help.
So you go through all this by May, and it's put on the ballot, and the community votes it down. Then what?
Well,
I mean,
hopefully that
that's
doesn't.
happened before, so that's all I'm saying.
Hopefully it doesn't. Yeah, hopefully it doesn't happen. But
Right.
if it does happen, then we have to make cuts. I mean, you saw this is not. You can't function.
Right.
The state's not going to allow us to operate in a deficit. So as early as 2027 there, at the end of 2027, right now, we're projected to be $200,000 in debt. And so we have to, that doesn't pass, we have to make cuts to keep from hitting a negative deficit at the end of 2027.
But in our community, there's a lot more households that own property who do not have children or have already raised their children. I remember when this came up before, that a lot of people who don't have children anymore, they don't care as much. Okay, so, a lot of the families in this community, they rent, so they're not paying the property taxes. So I'm a business person, I think in business terms, and I remember some of this from before.
Yeah.
But I hate to see this.
Yeah.
And I believe, if I could be wrong, and so please correct me if I'm incorrect, but I believe if the referendum, if it goes on the ballot and it comes in November and it is shot down, I believe we cannot run another referendum for at least two more after that.
Correct.
So if it gets shot down, and say it's on the ballot in November and it gets shot down, we cannot try to run another one next November. We would have to wait 2 more years to even try, and at that point, we're even farther in debt than we already are.
Yeah.
So just an FYI, so that's also out in the community to understand that I believe that's now part of the Senate bill also.
You
that
are
has been
correct.
passed, that you can't do it again within 2 years.
Did the bucket presentation help?
It was
Did that,
perfect.
did that did that help explain school funding a little bit better?
Good job.
At some point, we're keeping them just in case we need to put them over our heads. To protect ourselves.
Just need some monopoly money to put in there.
Right.
Did you guys learn something about school funding? I mean, did you learn some things? Because I'll tell you, I've been in education for over 30 years, and just preparing for this the last couple of weeks, I started learning some things, and so it's a very complex topic, and I'm just trying to hopefully make it easier to understand so people can, get a little bit better understanding of our challenges, and that, we just can't spend money freely. There's no other questions. That was the last agenda item.
Do remember, going through that more carefully, reading through it yourself will probably give you a lot better understanding. And there's plenty of places to ask questions. So feel free. I'd encourage you to do that. Because the people who support the school are going, if we do a referendum, we need people supporting us and explaining the things to other people throughout the community. We have public comments or questions on the agenda next. I think we're kind of doing that right now.
Yeah.
So if anybody has any other questions, we'll wait until we get to answer them all, but otherwise, we're done with the purpose for tonight's meeting. So if no other questions, can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to close.
Second.
We're done.
Okay, motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Thank you for coming.
Sure you already did, but just in case.